So now we are excited to share with you a virtual tour of our 2021 Capital Award winner, our highest design honor, Tierra Linda. Tierra Linda is the first affordable multifamily passive house in the city of Chicago. Featured in the video are the project team, Charlene Andrews and Juan Carlos Linares of Lucha, the developer, Catherine Baker, principal of Land and Bone and Baker Architects, Lindsay Elton, president of Eco Achievers, Connor Jansen, technical services director of Slipstream, Catherine Deitscheiver, principal RTM engineering, Lisa White, associate director of FIAS, and following the tour, we will have Catherine Baker, principal of Land and Bone and Baker Architects with us for Q&A. So please have your questions ready and enjoy the tour.
Is born out of sort of a community organizers from like the late 70s and early 80s, and they were basically advocating for equity in housing for home buyers in the community and just for people to have a stable place to live. So we're basically entering or close to our 40 years now that Lucha's been basically working towards keeping housing as a human right, providing housing services like housing counseling and building affordable housing. To be honest, I didn't know what BS or passive house really was until after Juan brought it. I was raised, I grew up in the 70s with a father who was very interested in passive solar design. So I was like, oh, well, isn't that from the 70s? But once I went online and kind of looked at it and learned more about BIAS, I realized it was sort of this newer way of kind of approaching building and energy efficiency, even though I still believe it focuses on some really key building science principles that are almost to some degree common sense. And I think that's really key about BIAS is that it's kind of really in some way common sense. You really want to seal a building because why pay for heat that's just going to go out through the windows or leaks in the building. And then you're not using as much energy to heat or cool the house. So it's just, to me, there's a lot of really key principles. If you're not going to go to BIAS to get a certification, there's still a lot about it that can inform how someone designs a building, both to be energy efficient, but also to be looking at indoor air quality and like just the best way to build a building these days.
Yeah, I was really lucky in a lot of respects because when I came on as executive director, we already had some low-income housing tax credits, which was the subsidy source for affordable housing development, allocated to a different project. So this was really a reiteration of these tax credits in a new project by which myself and the team, led by Charlene Andrews, who was our director of affordable housing, could really more deeply and profoundly engage with community to get the input on what they wanted to see in a building development. Now, part of the challenge of that was, number one, affordability. And as you can see, there's gentrification that's really run amok in Logan Square and Humboldt Park. And so even getting some of the empty parcels that we would need for this development became a challenge. But we were able to piece together many of the parcels for the eventual 45 unit housing development. One of the areas of Lucha that really attracted me, even going back to 2005, 2006, when I first joined the board of directors, was its really profound engagement with communities and getting the input for the developments so that our architects, Land and Bone Baker Architects, could really design around. So one of the processes that I recall very vividly was an evening by which we had some funding with enterprise community partners to do these health and equity outreach sessions. And in that session, there were 3 areas that really rose to the top that we heard from residents, both in English and in Spanish. Number one was affordability. So clearly that rents were no longer affordable in the community, and Lucha has been doing affordable housing development over almost 40 years now. So of course that was one of the key themes that we wanted to see in the development. Secondly, though, and interesting, we saw that health equity was an issue in the communities. We would ask, why aren't people paying their rents on time? What else is prohibiting them from really being able to live in units that we maintain pretty well? And health equity rose in that we found through an assessment with the Illinois Public Health Institute that depression, anxiety, and isolation were really issues that needed to be solved. And of course, Lucha is not a health provider, but it enabled us to partner with groups like the local hospitals, the local federally qualified health centers, so that it didn't just become a housing development, but Tierra Linda really became a partnership with our health partners. And then lastly, and certainly not least, interestingly, we saw that environmental justice and and energy equity rose to the top as well. And we had put forward some models like the passive house idea that I had learned in travels to Germany. And I clearly was no expert, but these were some of the menu items that we put forward. And community members asked us, well, why aren't we worthy of these technological innovations in our community? Why can't we have this? And on the team at Lucha, we thought, well, this is going to be hard to do, but I think we can do this. And the end result is a beautiful Tierra Linda development. Yeah, so we had a great team in Landon Bone Baker Architects with Charlene, with Passive House Institute US, with Eco Achievers. Just a really great team. Lynn Mathis, who was our contractor, who really learned together how to put the technical components together to meet the requirements of Passive House as a certification, as a designation. But there was also the money problem. So the extra marginal cost, if I recall, was about $300,000 above the almost $15 million project. So one would think that $300,000 is just a small percentage of that, but when it's all prescribed by the low-income housing tax credit program and the government subsidies that we received, that's hard to come by. So we took a risk by investing ourselves in the $300,000 marginal cost and also doing some fundraising. And we were able to achieve that amount to be able to do the passive house development and all the extra components that it requires. And at the end of the day, the benefits were threefold. So number one, again, we were able to fundraise so that we were able to meet the designation and just have that victory. But number two, the benefits also accrued to the tenants, who we thought after analyzing it, they could save about $1,000 a year in energy costs, because passive house, in its core is you don't really need the heat or air mechanicals because the walls are so thick. The unit stays 68 degrees most of the time. And I remember after the ribbon cutting and even weeks afterwards, we would walk through some of these units, and it was true. The unit was just so comfortable at 68 degrees every time we walked in there. So again, that benefit accrued to the tenants, and it currently does today. And lastly, of course, and this isn't something that was put forward as a major goal, but it really has come to fruition, is we became a model then for how to build for climate resiliency for not just the neighborhood and the city, but for the entire nation. Particularly in that the building is a 6-flat, which is very unique to Chicago. And we'd of course like to see all developers using this, or even further with net zero or other designations, but it became a real model that we can be proud of here. One of the things I wanted to address is, of course, the 606 trail, which was an abandoned rail line that runs right through the neighborhood between North Avenue and Armitage. And so we have community members, including our current state representative, who's a former student of mine and later became a Lucha board member, who said, we need to do something with this line. And so the idea of the 606 trail really began years before Tierra Linda, but we knew it was coming. Now, right behind me is North Avenue, which is one of the oldest streets in Chicago, and it's literally a highway. It's Highway 64. And even as you walk out of the door here, you smell the diesel, right? You hear the trucks, you see the asphalt cracking. So we knew there were these issues of environmental justice and energy equity. So what we were able to do is, with a number of focus groups with community members, who we didn't know, whether they had the capacity to think about these kinds of things in housing. We knew they needed affordability, but could they think beyond that? And we were overwhelmed with how they were bringing these issues to bear, that transportation is connected to housing, health is connected to housing. And we were able to put that all together in a project that I think we can be proud of, but also addresses then this environmental justice issue, not just through the technical components, but of where it's located and how it models housing for the rest of this community. Humboldt Park has for some time been a working class community and even working poor community, primarily consisting of people who have been here many, many years, including Spanish dominant Puerto Ricans and now Mexican Americans as well. A number of African Americans have called Humboldt Park home. But at the end of the day, for generations, it was almost like a community that had been abandoned. And so we see then in the last decade or two that gentrification has really crept westward from the Westtown community, from the Bucktown community. And so it became a threat for the people that lived here. Would they be able to stay? Would the rents be affordable for them to be able to send their kids to the schools? And this had a ripple effect because the fewer families that could stay here, the fewer students would stay in the schools. And then the schools get threatened now in terms of their own existence. And this is really part of the fabric of why Lucha exists. It's not just an affordable housing developer, but it's really a community asset that brings people together on a variety of sorts of issues in terms of the lived experience and the lived environment.
I'm Catherine Baker, a partner at Land & Bone Baker Architects. We're a firm located in Chicago that was established in 1987, and we work primarily on affordable housing. We've had the pleasure to work with Lucha since our inception, since 1987. Tierra Linda fits into the West Humboldt Park neighborhood where there are a lot of frame buildings, 2- and 3-story wood frame buildings, and over time those buildings, because they're owned by individual people, there's a lot of single scattered site projects. Each building is very individual, and so the goal for Tierra Linda was to make them also fit in contextually, but also reflect the residents. So we started with a design of the units and then really proposed multiple colors. Tierra Linda fits into the context of the Humboldt Park neighborhood because it's a scattered site project, meaning there's 6 flats, 3 flats, so it's very, the buildings are of the same size, the same height, a similar setback. But where we were able to really distinguish the Tierra Linda buildings was through color, through some of the materials. And we worked with Tierra Linda on proposing various colors, and they gave us feedback back. And then we really looked at the context of the 606 trail. If you look at some of the murals along the viaduct, you'll see very vibrant colors. And since the buildings were right next to those viaducts, we really wanted to play up that and show how those buildings, these newer buildings, contrasted with these murals and reflected kind of a new energy in Humboldt Park, right? It's this new energy of the 606 trail, this new energy of these buildings, and the preservation of affordable units here in Humboldt Park. The project has required us to actually address some of the code issues in Chicago that had hampered a multifamily passive house from being developed in Chicago in the past. And I think now that the city has seen the importance of passive house design and why these minor code adjustments are better, the new multifamily passive house projects in Chicago should be easier to permit in the city. One thing we've learned working with Lucha over the past several decades is again the importance of health, and we've learned that in some of these neighborhoods, residents spend a lot of time inside their unit as opposed to outside, and the indoor air quality is really critical to the health of the residents. So by designing the passive house building with the energy recovery ventilator system, we're seeing that our indoor air quality is much better. We also see that in Humboldt Park, 1/3 of children living in Humboldt Park are affected by asthma. So this project, again, was really critical in addressing indoor air quality. And we feel that passive house with the ERV system is very successful in making the indoor air quality much better for the children in these projects.
So we had what's called an energy recovery ventilation unit for every unit. So we constantly are bringing in ventilation air and tempering that electrically. So exchanging energy within the space. So we already had to exhaust air from the building, from the toilet rooms. With doing that, we typically just send it straight out of the building. Well, that air is already heated or cooled, it's tempered. So we want to extract that energy versus starting to put heat into air from the outside. So we send the air out through an ERV and we bring outside air back in, and they exchange the energy between the two, so we're tempering that outside air. Free energy transfer.
So Slipstream first got involved in this project and started working with Tierra Linda and Lucha when they applied to the ComEd Affordable Housing New Construction Program. And we were working with them by providing design guidance as well as incentives for meeting high performance building performance standards that really help those who need it the most. While going through the design, we noticed that there was a great opportunity to compare one of the 6 flat buildings that was going for Energy Star certification to a 6 flat building just 1 block away that was looking to achieve FIAS certification. And so FIAS certification at the time was really just starting off as a really high performance standard for affordable housing. And we felt it important to really understand how that project was comparing to the already good performing Energy Star building. So we worked with ComEd and their emerging technology department to fund a 2-year study that really looked in depth at the performance of those 2 buildings. So over the last 2 years, we collected well over 1 million data points across the 2 buildings. And during that time, we were really trying to figure out not just how those buildings were performing, but why they were performing at the levels that they were. And the first big takeaway from this study was that passive buildings save a significant amount of energy over the already good performing Energy Star buildings. In the case of this project, 36% in fact. And that was really driven by a reduction in heating and cooling loads. And it's quite important for the Chicago climate to reduce, especially those heating loads, and the difference between the 2 projects was over 60%. And the drivers behind that, while holistic with all of the different building systems coming together, really panned out to be the top 3. The top 3 performing measures at Tierra Linda were triple pane windows, the reduction of thermal bridging, very aggressive air sealing, and then in conjunction, the use of an energy recovery ventilation system. And in fact, the triple pane windows and the air sealing were some of the most cost-effective measures that you can do on these projects as well. So we also looked into how the HVAC systems were performing, and the cold climate heat pumps performed rather well. But we did notice that there were some areas that could be further tuned. And I suspect that on most projects without this level of monitoring and verification of performance, those types of things might have gotten lost. So we really recommend that if projects are trying something new, that they incorporate a retro commissioning or a verification period after construction. The other big takeaway is that while the passive building was very tightly air sealed, we actually saw an increase in mechanical ventilation over the more conventional Energy Star building, and no detrimental impacts to the indoor air quality. And the reason for this is that conventional residential buildings bring in their ventilation air through leakage or cracks within the envelope, and then that's pulled through an exhaust system. Now in FIAS buildings, they're required to have what's called balanced ventilation. So each individual unit is compartmentalized, and then a dedicated amount of supply air is brought into that unit that is tempered through the energy recovery ventilation system, and then that is brought out of the building through the exhaust. So it's balanced and it performs very well. Now the last main takeaway that we found is that if you are considering reductions in utility bills, reductions in the carbon footprint of the building's operation, and increases in indoor air quality, it's very important to consider a switch to all electric operation within multifamily buildings. So both the Energy Star buildings and the FIAS certified building used gas for cooking as well as domestic hot water. And by switching the domestic hot water to heat pump water heaters and gas to electric cooking, you're able to, one, reduce the amount of monthly demand charges from just having that gas connection, which actually hurt the overall utility cost savings. Two, you can connect everything to a grid that's getting ever cleaner and reduce the carbon footprint that way. And then lastly, you're able to remove one of the largest indoor air quality pollutant sources within a multifamily home, and that is gas cooking. Across the study, we learned several interesting comparisons. And if you'd like to learn more, we strongly suggest that you search for ComEd Emerging Technologies, Tierra Linda, for access to the full report. Ultimately, with this project, we really wanted to do the research right and take a very in-depth approach to understanding how the FIAS building was performing and why it would be better than the Energy Star building. And so the amount of work that went into creating the monitoring protocols, setting up hundreds of data point collection sites, working really closely with the design team and the builders and with Lucha to make it all come together felt really good in the end to get good, accurate data and come to a research-driven conclusion of why a FIAS building is performing better than what really is our national standard Energy Star buildings. And that increase in performance and the level of certainty that we're seeing with that will hopefully help move the market more towards passive buildings. This has just been a really rewarding experience to be able to take some of the really in-depth research that we do and combine that with the utility programs that we design and implement. And ComEd was really great to work with across this entire process. And I think they saw what was possible from better understanding these buildings and seeing that now come together in a new pathway within the affordable housing new construction programs. Very exciting.
So taking all these passive building principles and quantifying them into a certification metric is pretty much what the certification is. So it is a performance-based standard with prescriptive requirements. And what I mean by this is performance-based means you're shooting for certain energy targets. So you take these passive principles, the continuous insulation, air tightness, balanced ventilation with heat recovery, and the optimal solar gain, and you apply those to a certain amount to reduce heating and cooling loads in the building. And we have specific performance metrics for that. And then so those are what I would call passive conservation strategies. When people think of efficiency, they often think about what I would call active conservation strategies, which is changing out light bulbs or getting a better dishwasher or a better furnace, right? So you take the passive conservation strategies first, and then you apply the active conservation strategies and meet an overall performance metric for the building. And that's what shows up in the utility bill. So how much energy is my building actually using? So the certification is quantifying how far to go with each of those strategies, the passive and the active. So we have performance metrics for those, as well as prescriptive requirements. So these are essentially things that are really important to a quality building that don't show up in energy. So they don't show up in energy savings, like comfort, resilience, indoor air quality. You can't measure that with just energy. You can measure it, but you can't measure it. Some of them you can measure, but it doesn't show up in kilowatt hours. So then we have all these other kind of foundational elements to ensure that the building is a good quality building, but they're not performance targets per se. So at FIAS, we have not only our targets or performance targets for reducing heating and cooling loads, but we also look at overall impact of the building on society. And we measure that using source energy. So source energy is kind of like site energy, what's on your utility bill, but it takes more into account. It takes into account the energy that's used to generate electricity, let's say, to come to your building, and the line losses to get it there. So it's more of a holistic measurement of the energy you're using. And we set a target for source energy per person in residential buildings. And this per person limit is really based on the amount of carbon dioxide emissions each person should be allowed until 2050 if we want to reduce global climate change by less than 2 degrees Celsius. So we know you can only emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide as your personal life, and then part of that gets associated with the building you live in, and that's directly how we set the target. So it's directly associated with reducing operational carbon dioxide emissions.
So Passive House is built on a series of other certification programs, and its foundation is Energy Star. Energy Star has a number of components from the initial energy modeling. So there's a certain performance-based metric that you have to hit with the energy models. And then it also looks at envelope construction, making sure that you've got a tight, sound thermal envelope. There's a durability component to it. So when you're creating a tighter envelope, you want to make sure that you're also keeping an eye on moisture mitigation so that the building is sound. There's HVAC criteria that you have to hit, and there are different professionals along the line. So there's us as the rater. You've got an HVAC team that needs to make sure that their systems are running correctly. Everything is very calculated. There are certain standards that they have to adhere to and design to. So the whole program itself is a well thought out program that's actually the basis of a lot of the green building certifications. And then you take a step up above that to the Zero Energy Ready Homes program, which has a higher energy performance target. It also has specific criteria for the HVAC location. It's got a domestic hot water efficiency aspect to it. It incorporates the Indoor Air Plus program. And then you're required to be renewable ready. So you don't have to put solar or have renewables on site, but you do have to have the infrastructure in place to put it on in the future. And then the third certification that's part of Zero Energy Ready Homes is Indoor Air Plus. And Indoor Air Plus is an indoor air quality program. So the certification looks at site work. It looks at HVAC. It looks at radon. It looks at pest control. It looks at materials. So when you take a look at the full suite of certifications, you're getting the energy efficiency component, you're getting the indoor air component, you're getting the right size mechanicals and performance, and you're wrapping that all into one, as well as future proofing it and putting the renewable component in. So you've kind of got that tiered hierarchy, and then you're brought to FIAS, to Passive House. The larger step up, which is, I mean, it's a feat, and it really takes that initial coordination and really bumps it up. The whole envelope, the building test, the blower door test is really aggressive, and it's very intentional, and everyone has to be on board to hit these performance targets. This project will influence future projects because it provides an example, and it shows that this achievement is accessible and attainable for any project team. You now have an example of how you can get it done. I have heard on other projects that there's no way that this certification is possible, or from other colleagues, there's no way that we can do this, but you can, and we have it right here. And we did it with a group and a team of professionals that hadn't done it before, but they found the key to make it happen. So every scenario is different, but it just stays with me that yes, we can do it. We just have to find sometimes, the right puzzle pieces in order to accomplish that.
I'm most proud of just really that we were able to take that community input and think about what we were seeing with health and housing, and really bring that into Tierra Linda and really push ourselves to think about that and what people were telling us about their health issues and how that related to the housing that we were building. We were more innovative because of that input.
There's so many aspects of this development to be proud of. Number one is the community came through, and they were the ones that told us what they wanted in terms of components of this development. So that's the first thing I'm proud of. But also just the unique aspect, not just of the passive house, but the entire development itself, being 3 flats and 6 flats in the community here, which is not an easy thing to do. So an entire team coming together, whether it was the architects and the contractors or the Passive House Institute themselves, and just a number of local and national team members that came together to really put this innovative development forward.
Thank you, Catherine, and to the whole Tierra Linda team. What a fantastic project. Catherine, you with us? There you are. Okay.
I'm here.
Move you over on the screen a little bit. Hi, how are you? Well, Catherine, I am, I'm such a fan of you and Landon Baker's, the very inspirational project work you guys do. So just great to see and learn more about this project. I've got a couple of questions. While we see if there's any other questions that come in online. So give me 1 second here. Let me call it up. One aspect of with this particular project, with the passive home design approach, someone had mentioned, yes, there's the fact that the building is using electrical energy from a clean energy grid from a community generated renewable energy supply source. Was there ever any thought to incorporate solar to bring that additional component into the homeowners to either give back energy back to the grid, or further reduce their utility costs?
Yes, and I'd like to back up and first of all say thank you, AIA Illinois, for this honor and being on this panel this morning. It's been beyond inspirational to follow these two wonderful speakers that we had earlier. And I also want to acknowledge La Casa Norte, which was the filming location for those interviews. You can get a sense that Humboldt Park has a real sense of community and a real sense of sharing and making sure everyone in the community is taken care of. And to your question, yes, we did look at solar to make the buildings net zero. But as you heard Juan Carlos speak about just the additional costs to go to passive house or FIAS was a bit of a lift and cost. So one aspect is, or one strategy is to make these buildings net zero ready. So things are in place. If solar panels can be added later, they will. I'd also like to, this was a little heavy on the FIAS side of it, mainly because we wanted to make sure everyone got their HSW learning units for this session. But the holistic approach to healthy housing also had components of a community garden that will be built on one of the sites later. There are a cooking program, and then there's also, we did a study of how to make biking a little bit more friendly for residents. And this is a small move on a housing project, but what we learned is, and this was through talking to residents, that outdoor bike racks were not safe and would not be used. So we allocated a space inside the unit in the back corridor, and there's a bike rack, and they actually are used. So people do have their bikes, and then they do bike and they get up on the 606 trail. So these are some of the other aspects that Lucha worked really hard on, and we worked hard on to make sure that there was a holistic attempt to talk about health equity in these projects.
I love the community garden, interweaving that in the project, and you guys certainly know how to do that. Real quick, another related to cost, the ERV systems, is that a big cost component, introducing that into the project?
It's not, but the most cost-effective ERV unit that we were looking at for that project, which created a little bit of, we had to get a code variance for it, was the wheel type, and I'm not the most technical person on that, but in the end it was approved, and so it is being used. Hopefully it can be used on other projects. But single family houses have ERVs. It's just a way to make sure that you're getting fresh air and it's tempered into these tightly sealed buildings.
Yeah. I see we got, Scott Rapp's got a question. Can you see that, Catherine?
Has anyone quantified the potential utility savings for residents? Yes, and that is in that, I'll just read this. Has anyone quantified the potential utility savings for the residents? And this is where the partnership with Slipstream has been absolutely amazing. I mean, they've got sensors all over the Fias building and then the Energy Star 6 Flat building, so you can compare directly like what the energy usage is in each of these buildings. And we've seen half the amount of energy usage in winter for heating costs. And then where it kind of goes awry is the cooling costs in the summer. And I'm not sure if that's a factor of people opening their windows and not using air conditioning as much, maybe trying to save some money on that. But that's a bit of an anomaly that the air conditioning has been wasn't as much savings as we thought. And then being in Chicago, the energy usage is down, but the energy costs might not be down as much as you would think, because natural gas is still cheaper than electricity in Chicago. So it's yes and no.
We got a question here that came in. Are there any opportunities for urban single-family high-performance smart houses?
Yes, and those have been done. Though we have some in Chicago, we have them in Illinois, and one of the quirks of the Chicago building code, why a multifamily passive house has not been built sooner, is we can't build wood. Once you're above 3 stories or so, you're limited to the amount of wood construction you can build. So once you go to steel stud or masonry, suddenly the costs go up. One other thing that we found is the Fias building is EFIS. And one of the quirks of Chicago and unions and trades is that was one way to use one scaffold system to sheathe the building versus a scaffold that might go up for one trade to do steel studs, had to take their scaffold down, put up another scaffold system to do a siding system. And then of course, with steel studs, you've got 4 to 6 inches of insulation on the outside of the steel studs. So you have to figure out what your cladding system is going to be. But single family house, yes, they've been done. We've got great architects in the city who have been working on this. Doug Farr, I'm sure you all know him, but he's been doing that. Tom Dilley in Oak Park, he's a great resource. Yes, please look at his website. He's showing how he's renovating his own house right now. So there are some absolutely leaders in this for single family houses and smaller projects. And they are a resource for us to use for sure.
We've got time for one more question, Catherine, and there's a couple more that popped up. If you want to just pick one to go from, I can't see it from here, but.
I'm going to pick, was there any friction in the permitting process as a result of the Fias approach? And I think we talked about that a little bit with the ERV wheel. And then Chicago, again, this is purely Chicago code. So in other jurisdictions around the country, these are not issues. These are just code issues here. The mechanical exhaust in Chicago, Department of Design buildings here, once you start exhausting a little bit more air, you suddenly have to start supplying a lot more air. So your mechanical systems might grow. And so again, we looked to the city. The city was very good in working with us to figure these solutions out. And so I wouldn't say there's friction. It was just more, we need to talk about this. Yeah, we need to talk about this and figure out how to make it work.
Well, I think you mentioned, and the video mentions, I mean, now the the playbook is done with this kind of development, so it can be replicated. Just real quick in closing, what's next? Like I said, love the body of work you guys do. Anything fun that you're working on now that you want to share,
Wow,
project-wise?
um, wow, we have a lot of projects because we always say this. We have these wonderful clients who are working in these communities with these great ideas of how to make their communities better. So I don't know if I could pick one at the moment, but I just keep your eye out.
All affordable housing related?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much our community-based design, yeah.
Okay. Well, good. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Catherine. Again, fantastic project. Love the 606 and the fact that you guys are playing off of that. So thank you. And again, thanks to the whole Terra Linda team.